Oskar Schindler's post-war life, like everything that had preceded it, was a study in contrast and ambiguity. There were times of great joy and extended periods of despair. While all of his business attempts in Argentina were failing, he always managed to find the time and the money for beautiful women. These activities came to an end in 1957, when Schindler was bankrupt. The following year, he left his wife Emily to fend for herself and returned to Germany, never to see her again. In Frankfurt, Schindler lived in a one-room apartment overlooking the train station. Whenever he received money from various Jewish organizations, he would leave the squalor of his apartment and live the high life for a while. In 1961, after a number of failed business ventures in Germany, Schindler went to Israel at the invitation of a group of Jews who were among those he'd saved. 800 people greeted him at the airport. At the time, Adolf Eichmann, the architect of Hitler's final solution, was being tried in Jerusalem. The Israeli press learned of Schindler's wartime heroics and played up the obvious contrasts between these two former Nazis. The German press also filed stories about Schindler. So when he returned to Germany, his fellow countrymen knew all about what he'd done during the war.
He was condemned by the Germans, a traitor. He saved witnesses to the truth. 1,300 of them, children, women, and men. And they are alive, and they will talk, and they will tell the truth.
While the Nuremberg trials had held accountable many of the Nazi leaders, like Hermann Goering and even Amon Geth, who were both executed, there were millions of former Nazis who'd escaped punishment and returned to civilian life. Schindler's fellow countrymen called him a Jew kisser. They threw rocks at him. No one would do any business with him. There was even an attempt on his life. Schindler contemplated suicide, but didn't want to give his enemies the satisfaction. Schindler's spirits were lifted when he returned to Israel on April 28, 1962, his 54th birthday. He'd been invited to plant a carob tree in the Garden of the Righteous at Yad Vashem, Israel's memorial to the Holocaust. Schindler was also awarded a medal. It was inscribed with the Talmudic verse he'd heard 2 decades earlier from Itzhak Stern: "He who saves a single life saves the world entire." In 1963, an article on Schindler's heroism brought his story to the attention of MGM Studios, which optioned it for $50,000. As he did whenever he got money, Oskar spent it quickly. The MGM film was never made. Oskar Schindler's former factory workers eventually began calling themselves Schindler-Juden, Schindler's Jews. They felt a lifelong bond to the man who rescued them. In 1968, survivor Leopold Page and others established a foundation that would provide for Schindler for the rest of his life. Schindler Jude Leon Layson was at a Los Angeles reception held in Schindler's honor. He recalls his emotional reunion with the man who'd saved him, his parents, and 2 of his 4 siblings over 2 decades earlier.
I reached out my hand and started to introduce myself because I realized, I was a grown man, and last time he saw me, I was not yet 15, So he interrupted me. He says, "I know who you are. You're little Layson."
Schindler had many heartfelt reunions with those he'd saved. For the rest of his life, he returned annually to Israel to celebrate his birthday on month-long visits paid for by his Schindler Juden. They were wonderful times that by all accounts seemed to be the highlights of his post-war life.
He felt in Israel every time he was invited like a king. He was accepted like the most important person, and he was cherished by those people, loved by the new children, by the new generation.
In 1973, Schindler told Page he wanted to be buried in Israel. The following year, on October 9, 1974, Oskar Schindler died of a massive heart attack in Frankfurt. He was only 66. The devastating news traveled quickly to Schindler-Juden throughout the world.
We cry. It was a tragedy for us personally. And I sometimes was asking myself, did we did enough for him? That we fulfilled the obligation? Maybe yes, maybe no. I tried my best.
The Schindler-Juden collected the money to have his remains brought to Israel. At the dedication of his Israeli gravesite, 500 survivors paid last respects to their hero and savior. But Oskar Schindler lives on.
People have a choice in their lives. And Schindler is an example of it. He was a Nazi, but he was a good person.
His story teaches children everywhere they can choose not to grow up hating those who are a different religion, nationality, or race. They can look to Oskar Schindler as a noble example of doing right and opposing those who do wrong.
He's an indictment of the generation of perpetrators. He belies the truth that they think they tell when they say, well, everybody did it, we had no choice, we couldn't have done otherwise, there were no alternatives. You point to Oskar Schindler, there were. He made a difference, and he made a difference when it counted.